Chapter 10 The Journey Back. The Antelope and the Alligator. It was best, I decided, for me and Buddy to go walk the towpath at night because the police had been looking for me by then. After hiding out all day in the bushes, I had pretty much dried off, but my pants were torn in the knee, and the jacket, which had been tied around my waist, dried all wrinkly, so I was sure I looked pretty beat up. Walking, all I could think about was food. I knew that there was still pancake mix and the Oriental-style spicy chicken dinner in the backpack, but they were my absolute fallbacks. The moonlight wasn't as bright as the night before, but there was still enough for me to see things along the way. Like all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of this bridge, crossing high above a creek, and underneath I see a beautiful triple arch thing. When we stopped for a rest, I pulled the flashlight out and the guidebook out of my backpack and read that this arch thing is called the Kanakachag Aqueduct. Get this, it was a bridge for the canal. A canal which was dug in the dirt and filled with tons of water once crossed this creek on this aqueduct. If you were a fish back then that looked up one day, you'd see a boat floating up there. Amazing. Back in the 1920s, a canal boat busted through one side of the aqueduct and fell into the creek below. The captain's son, walking with the mules, pulled the boat, was fast thinking enough to cut the tow line so that the mules didn't get hauled overboard too. Those canal boat owners got attached to the mules. I know because I remember the song, which started going through my head. I got a mule and her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good worker and a good old pal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. While I walked, Buddy trotted right beside me, like he was my good old pal. If I stopped, he stopped. If I started jogging, he trotted. We even went to the bathroom in the woods at the same time. Walking along towards morning, when we could see better, we saw some pretty sights, like this great blue heron that flew low like a glider right down over the middle of the canal. Since the canal isn't used anymore, parts of it have dried up. Huge trees grow in some places, and one grassy spot, a whole herd of deer was grazing. 15 miles on an Erie Canal. Once we saw 10 turtles. Looked like sliders, clumped together on a log, soaking up the sun. Sometimes we'd heard these far-off rumbles that turned out to be freight trains going by on the opposite side of the river. I tried to count the boxcars once. Got up to around 75 and gave up. Just about the time I figured we ought to find a place to hide out for the day, we came to the visitors center. I didn't want to get seen, but I was so hungry I snuck around and poked in the trash barrels. "You're up early," a voice said. I whipped around and must have looked startled, not to mention embarrassed. "Oh, I didn't mean to scare you," the guy said. He looked like someone my parents' age, only he wore a ranger outfit and had long, gray ponytail and a big mustache. I was just opening up for the day. "Oh, yeah. Good morning," I replied, trying to sound normal while I sized up the guy and wondering if he might be on the lookout for a cliffside runaway. "You hiking the towpath?" the guy asked. Just then, Buddy caught up and sat beside me. "Yeah," I said. "Me and my dog were hiking the path for a couple of days." "Where you from?" he asked. I had to think quick. Where was I from? I recalled one end of the trail. Cumberland," I told him. "Ah, you doing the whole towpath then? All the way to Georgetown?" "Yep," I nodded, "all the way." The guy kind of looked me over. What did he see? The tear in my pants, the wrinkled jacket, the dirt on my face, a little bit of stubble on my chin? "Well, you might want to keep an eye out for the weather today. Clouds are moving in. Supposed to be a storm blowing through tonight." "Thanks," I said. "Thanks very much. I'll keep an eye out. If you need any supplies, we sell a few things inside. Bread, peanut butter, water, that kind of thing." Man, I would have loved some of that peanut butter, but I suspected it cost more than the $3 I had in my pocket. I'm all set. I started walking away fast, 'cause that guy must have been wondering why I was poking around in the trash, where all my gear was. I stepped up my pace and I wondered where Buddy went. Had I lost him already? All of a sudden, the guy shouted, "Hey, come back here!" I didn't even turn around. I just took off running. I bet I ran a half a mile before I glanced backwards. That's when I saw Buddy trotting after me, with a loaf of bread in his mouth. "You little thief," I knelt down, breathless, and reached my hand out. "Give." Buddy dropped the entire loaf in my hands. "You're something else, you know it?" I rubbed him on the head. We went another couple of miles before we hid in the woods and dove into the bread. It was plain old white bread, but it was delicious. We ate 3 pieces each, and I washed mine down with sips of water. I stuffed the rest of the loaf into the backpack and we settled in to hide for the day. Buddy went right to sleep, but I couldn't, so I pulled out the guidebook again and I read up on the dam that nearly killed me. Dam number 5. It was one of a bunch of dams built on the river to force water into the canal. What's so historic about the dam is that during the Civil War, Stonewall Jackson tried to blow it up. In December of 1861, Confederate soldiers slid into the water at night and started hacking away at the dam with sledgehammers. But in the morning, Union leaders blasted them with a cannon. There was a big battle over the next couple of days, but the Confederates finally won. The Confederates finally gave up. Wow, made me feel weird having gone over a dam that was the site of a Civil War battle. By evening, when I started walking again, I noticed it was clouding up, and I remembered the ranger's warning about rain. When it started to sprinkle, I headed for cover in this old stone building that had a couple of walls and part of the roof missing. It was dark already, so I took out the flashlight and shined it on a sign that called the building a lock house. There were pictures of the lock keeper who once lived there with his family. It was his job, I read, to fill and drain the locks, which raised and lowered the canal boats from one level to another. Cool, I thought, how somebody invented all that stuff. Inside the lock house, I sat on the dirt floor and I took the backpack off. I looked for my sweatshirt, forgetting that I had lost it when we took the dive over the dam. The temperature had really dropped, so I put the gray jacket back on and zipped it up. Buddy lay down beside me. I was so hungry my stomach rumbled. After sitting there in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain pouring down outside, I gave in and pulled out the bread. I also ripped open the bag of Oriental style spicy chicken. It was all dry and powdery. "Dehydrated," the pouch said. But since I didn't have a fire or a pot to cook it in, I just sprinkled some on a piece of bread and ate it. Parts of it, like the vegetables, were as hard as stones, and the noodles were crunchy instead of warm and soft. But this is how desperate I was. I closed my eyes and savored every bite. Buddy had 2 pieces of bread, same as me. Then I took a big swallow of river water from the bottle. Dinner was over. I was tired of reading the guidebook, so I pulled the white card out of my pocket and I turned on the little red flashlight. I shone it smack on the AMBCs of anger. A. Activating event. M. Mind activity. B. Body reactions. C. Consequences. Anger. They said that was like my major problem. I clicked off the light and I shoved the card back in my pocket. Didn't need to run down the batteries on that crap. Darn right I was angry. My father was to blame for all of it, too. True, I still hadn't figured out exactly how I was going to protect my mom and the kids from him. But I'd find something, or something would come to me. I was sure of it. I rested my head against the brick wall behind me. The river was about 100 yards away, and the rain bouncing off it created a gray haze. When lightning flashed, I could see 2 small islands with skinny trees and overgrown bushes halfway across the river. The islands looked like they could have been big animals, like giant water buffaloes wallowing in the river. And that made me think back to the white erase board in Miss Laurie's office. How one day she had drawn a wavy line river with a blue felt tip marker and then added two animals in black. A big horned antelope stood on the shore, and an alligator, cruising the water with his mouth open, showed off his big, sharp teeth. That's the antelope and the alligator, she told me. No kiddin', I said. But what's it mean? I mean, why did you draw it? Well, I'm glad you asked, she said, smiling. And she did have a nice smile. But then she went and told me this little story that made me uncomfortable. She said that the antelope on the shore was supposed to be me. I was looking across the river at my home, but there was an alligator, my dad, in the water. I had to figure out, she said, how to get home across the river while avoiding the alligator. Get it? Well, I got it all right, only I had to shake my head. Miss Laurie, I don't mean no disrespect, but you don't understand. I spent half my life trying to avoid my dad. But what can you do when you're little and there's no place to hide? Digger, were there any signs of when your dad was about to go off? Did his coming home late mean that he had been drinking? Was that a heads up? No. I kept shaking my head. No signs. Nothing like that. My dad didn't work half the time, so he didn't have like a regular schedule. When he was sober, did you try to talk to him? I sat up and looked in her eyes. You can't talk to my dad. He's like a brick wall. Even if you think he's listening, he lives by his own rules and they change every day. Miss Laurie frowned, so I gave her an example. Okay, look, I said, and I tried to explain to her. One day, my guidance counselor, Mr. Benoit from the middle school, he came out to my house. This was back in the sixth grade. He wanted to talk to my parents about why I had missed so much school. Was I sick? Was there a family emergency? Well, I was standing there in the kitchen so that he could see I wasn't dying from pneumonia or anything. My father wasn't there, but my mother sat at the kitchen table. No family emergency, she said. He's been helping my husband with work. But she couldn't go on. She couldn't talk. She leaned her forehead into one of her hands and folded. My mom, she's a good person, really, but she's just not strong when it comes to challenges with my dad. I spoke up so Mr. Benoit would lay off my mom. I told him the truth, that I had to stay home from school and help my dad haul bush at the construction site because I was being punished. He asked me why. What did you do? Why were you being punished? My mom and me, our eyes met. I hadn't said anything for years, so why start now? Maybe because I was sick of it, that's why. I was still afraid of my dad. Sure, it hurt to get a whooping upside the head, but nothing ever got better, and I was worried that he'd start beating on Hank and Leanne. I have to stay home, I finally told Mr. Benoit, on account of I brought home a good report card. Of course, he didn't believe me. That's crazy, he said. I shrugged. My dad said he didn't want no smart-ass son. What he needed was someone to help him get the work done. Well, they got a hold of my dad and gave him a big lecture about child labor laws and how he couldn't keep a kid out of school like that to make him work, and my dad backed off. I was in class that very next day, and my dad never said another word about it. See, you never knew. I think Dad was afraid of child protective people from the county, that they would take us kids away. But, why would he care? Anyway, I never tried as hard in school after that. Miss Laurie hung on to every word I said, and I have to admit it was kind of nice having someone to care about what I was saying. Here's the kicker, I went on. I never explained to Mr. Minoy the whole reason I worked so hard to bring my grades up was to make my dad proud. So maybe he wouldn't be so mean. And so maybe he would let me go out for basketball. I thought that if he went to basketball games at night, he wouldn't drink so much and would sort of be like a normal dad. I was dreaming though, wasn't I, Miss Laurie? It's not ever going to happen. He won't change. Some kids, they just don't live in normal families, and nothing you say in here can change that. Miss Laurie was quiet. I mean, I know she said something to try to make me feel better, because that was her job. But really, what could she say that would make any difference? What could she do? What could anybody do? So as far as I was concerned, The whole point of the antelope alligator story was out of whack. Avoiding my old man is not the answer or the challenge. Getting rid of him was the answer. How to do that was the challenge.